Hello everyone, I'm Kei-Nova. If you're new, welcome to the channel, and if not, welcome back. Today we're looking at the cult classic Slave Zero, an anime biomecha shooter held back by an unfortunate porting agreement. As usual, I'm going to be brutally honest, so if you really like Slave Zero and you're sensitive to other people's opinions, feel free to click off the video now. When it comes to versions, most people know Slave Zero by its Dreamcast console port. At the time of release, it was heavily advertised, filling game magazines with adverts clearly advertising Slave Zero as the next big thing. And being 11 at the time, I probably would have wanted it based on the advertising alone. Sure, it wasn't a good representation of what the game was, but I'll be the first to admit that those of us who grew up in the 90s, we weren't exactly hard to hook. Sadly, I didn't have a Dreamcast, or money, so I never got to experience what this one was all about. So no, I have no history with Slave Zero, none at all. For years, it sat in my backlog, its existence slowly fading from my mind as the annoyances of adult life consumed my joy. Well, today we're fighting back. Not only that, we're not playing the Dreamcast version. Due to a code freeze that stopped Slave Zero's far superior PC version from being advertised properly, many don't even know that it came to home computers back in the day. It's a shame too, because the console port is severely lacking. It also has some of the worst controls I've ever seen in a Dreamcast game. Not only in graphical fidelity, but also in the sound department. The soundtrack isn't even present, and really, if you're going to play a giant robot action game taking place in a biomechanical cyberpunk world, you're going to need all the tone you can get. This soundtrack, it provides this, and then some. Oh, and get this, MechWarrior 2's lead game designer Sean Vesey acted as a director on Slave Zero. So there's your obligatory MechWarrior tie-in for this video. And yeah, be ready, there's going to be a lot of those on the channel this year. Story-wise, if you've ever seen a one-shot mecha anime in the 80s or 90s, this is pretty much hitting the same sort of beats. The development team didn't really hide this, copiously mentioning anime influences in interviews, one of those being Neon Genesis Evangelion. Fans will doubtlessly notice that a good deal of the game's ideas draw from NGE specifically. AT fields are mentioned, though they're literally force fields here. Slave units, the game's titular biomecha, are grown from embryos, yet still piloted by humans. Even the strange spiritual undertones are present, though not exactly in the same way. You're also likely to spot a whole lot more connections to other anime and comics, with the game's setting being in a massive megacity. It might be a Judge Dredd reference, I don't know. Being a big anime nerd in the 90s, I love it, even though I'm not exactly as close to the format as I once was.
Look out, Chan!
Crush him!
While this world and premise and its ideas are really cool, the story is admittedly not that great. All of Slave Zero's stylings act as a paint job for what ends up being a rather generic plot. Everything boils down to the typical rebel vs. emperor trope, which was overdone even in 1999. Sadly, even today, media is still drenched in its mediocrity. For the longest time, I'd played hoping that there would be a deeper exploration of the characters and themes. Slave Zero's beginning is captivating, showing off its world and characters through cutscenes. Well, you know, when you can hear them.
Now when you're through enjoying the moment, proceed directly to the lab center. We don't have much time before communications are restored.
There is a good sense of movement, like you're working towards some grand goal for a personal reason yet to be revealed. Only nothing comes of it but the obvious, defeating the Sov Khan. He's pretty much the Emperor from Star Wars with a slight Japanese influence, complete with Jedi powers.
Well, Captain, have you anything to add? Unleash Revenant Prime.
What is the spiritual brotherhood you're a part of? How did they get the prototype Slave Zero? Why did the main characters so willingly meld with Slave Zero? None of this is answered. Instead, the game's main focus is pushing towards the megacity center, bolstering the spiritual brotherhood's forces, blowing up dropships, and fighting against other biological mecha monstrosities. Though, even with the game lasting around 6 hours only, it gets more than tedious. Taking down enemies feels great at first, gameplay is smooth and weapons are fun. As the game progresses, you'll get a hold of everything from rifles, plasma cannons, and missiles, all the way to siege cannons, anti-material rifles, and plasma launchers. Only 2 weapons can be held at once though, with missiles acting as an alternate to grenade throws, predating Halo's lauded weapon limitations by a couple years. Though Slave Zero certainly doesn't have the gameplay of Halo at all. You could occasionally pick up people, cars, or the beams of buildings too. The former can be thrown, while anything held in the hand strengthens Slave Zero's basic melee attack. All of this becomes sort of a rarity as the game goes on, however. It didn't take me long to realize that the game falls under the category of, as those younger than me say it, boomer shooter. Though Slave Zero is built on its own ecstasy engine, it feels a little bit too much like Quake, and if you were to toggle its first-person option, it practically is. There is, of course, a bit more verticality, however, you're merely strafing and shooting as a mecha. Strip that away and the game isn't all that surprising or original, at least when it comes to gameplay. And since Slave Zero was a commercial flop, it would also be the only game ever developed with the ecstasy engine, though I don't find that too surprising because it didn't actually do anything all that new or surprising. I hate to say it, but after 4 or 5 hours, Slave Zero becomes downright boring, beginning as dynamic with interesting areas and enemy placements, but eventually devolving into room-to-room gunfights against bullet sponge enemies. Even boss battles, which are a highlight for its first half, absolutely crumble as time goes on. Some of them didn't even react to me unless shot, forcing them to use reactionary scripts that were extremely exploitable. Dropship takedowns also get repeated a couple times, with the first being painless and the second being ridiculously extended by increasing the ship's health pool massively. Missions became extremely repetitive as well, with some of them being the same objective repeated 3 times in a row. Even the text at the end of these missions is relatively the same. Now, I can't fully fault the developers on this one. They've openly expressed that if it hadn't been for the Dreamcast version of the game, they would have liked to give Slave Zero's PC port a little more work. Though, as I mentioned, their agreement with Sega led them to a code freeze. This meant that nothing could be modified or improved on, and was instead held until the Sega version was completed, so that both could be released simultaneously. Because of this, 2 versions of a middling game were released, the most advertised being a subpar port, and the far more superior PC version being practically ignored. It wouldn't take off as intended, and most of Slave Zero's interesting ideas would be practically buried with time, mostly. Of course, if you're interested in trying out Slave Zero, I suggest giving it a go. You may have a more positive experience than I did. Honestly, I'm just some person on the internet, and my opinion is far from end all. The game is available on Steam, which also happens to be the version I'm playing with this video, but I'll warn you now, this game crashes a lot. You're going to have to fidget with some compatibility options and try to stay away from maxing out every setting. It doesn't mesh well with newer software and hardware, and can periodically get caught in rolling crash loops. Now, I'm aware that there is a semi-prequel being developed by Poppyworks titled Slave Zero X. Its style appears to be radically different, being a third-person beat-em-up rather than a third-person shooter. Apparently, there is going to be more of a focus on story. However, that is yet to be seen. But if you'd like me to check that one out when it comes to Steam, do let me know. I've been Kei-Nova, thank you for watching, sub if you want to support the channel, leave a like and comment if you enjoy the video, and of course, thank you for all my current subscribers for sticking with the channel so long.